Hey folks, it's Patriot Nurse. Thank you so much for joining me. In this video, we're going to break down the debacle that was the presidential debate last night and the important lessons that we can take away from it as we head into the election. Let's get started. So I had pre-gamed for this one for a while. I baked enchiladas in honor of all the illegal immigrants that have come in, and we really enjoyed the evening as it unfolded. The first thing that I took away is that elder abuse is very, very real. And when I say elder abuse is real, it was obvious to me that Joe was not in a position to advocate for himself and what he really wanted. He couldn't even string together two coherent thoughts, and it was really a shame. But are we really surprised by this? Are we really surprised that the same people who make their hill to die on, the ability to abort innocent children, that they would use and abuse someone who is not capable of advocating for himself, that they would take an elder who's obviously suffering from dementia, put him up as a puppet on stage so that they could do their wicked ways behind the scenes and get their way, while the illusion of the democratic process had happened under the guise of the electoral process? No. That man, as evil and wicked as he is a poster child for elder abuse and for people in senile years and experiences of their lives to be taken advantage of. The sad thing is that now this is happening in the highest office of the land, and it was gut-wrenching for me to watch. And the thing is, I personally, like many of you, have no love lost on these people, and I think they're very wicked. I think they're demonic. But what was so awful, and I just felt a pit in my stomach, was watching him freeze on camera in the midst of what is supposed to be the height of the democratic process and of the right of people to have a say in their government, watching a debate in the highest elected office of the land, in a debate to determine the fitness of that individual and how the electorate would jive with what he was saying. He couldn't, not only could he not compete, he couldn't even show up to the degree that a 6th or 7th grader could. And that was really an awful feeling. It was just awful. So elder abuse is very real. The second thing that I took away from this is that we are being represented by a man who could not consent to having his tonsils taken out, let alone lead the supposed most free country in the world, which obviously is not in this day and age. It is not. But when I consider the implications, the emperor has no clothes, and the rest of the world now knows it, particularly the rest of the non-democratic world. And this leads me into the third point. The third point, nations who are belligerent, nations who are run by dictator states, by military juntas, by human rights abusers, or essentially people who are tyrants and genocidal maniacs, they have zero incentive right now to comply with anything that we would want to wield our power on. Because when it comes right down to it, the leader of the executive branch, the commander-in-chief, is not fit to take himself out of bed and toilet himself without getting lost. And that's a really sad day for the American Republic. For the republic that we were told by Benjamin Franklin would stay this way in so long as we could keep it. Last night was a really, really sad display of just how far we've come. And I was thinking about it this morning. The United States is fundamentally different than the rest of the world, certainly the rest of Europe, in the sense that we do not have a history of a people. We don't have the long legacy, the multi-century legacy that some nations like France and like Prussia and now Germany, we don't have that to the degree the rest of the world does. Our founders intended this nation to be not a nation of legacied, storied races per se, but of people living out the highest ideals of the Enlightenment. This nation will only be a nation insofar as we have allegiance to those principles. What I saw on stage last night was the furthest departure from the principles of the Enlightenment that could be seen. The Democrat Party has taken a man who should be in memory care and used him to further their aims of warmongering, continually, started by Republican presidents, of course, but continuing these wars ad nauseum, advocating for more taxes, higher taxes, stealing more money from people to pay in the Ponzi scheme that is social services. We will not be a nation if we can't remember our principles. And we don't have those principles anymore. The fact that the Democrat Party thought that they could dupe the American public on a national stage to this degree shows just how far we've come. The 25th Amendment is something that had been batted around because the Democrats were desperately trying to get Trump out of office. But now I think you actually have a very legitimate case, the 25th Amendment, effectively, that the president can be removed from office if he is deemed unfit. I cannot think of any better poster child for being unfit to lead the executive branch than Joe Biden. That man is not fit to command the armed forces. That man is not fit to administer a country. He can't even administer his own sentences. His mental faculties are so far gone that there's no redemption to it. So the question is, how is this going to be used in an election year? Are the Democrat Party, are they going to somehow change horses in the middle of a race? To quote FDR, is that what they're going to do? Leave me a comment below. What do you think they're going to do? Do you think that they're going to parachute somebody else in? Do you think that they're going to just be loyal to Joe to the end of things and then watch the ship sail merrily into the sunset off of a cliff? What do you think? The next thing that I took away was that the freeze gaffe happened 13 minutes in. Now, this is pretty critical. We all know, if you've been following the news for any amount of time, that Joe has all of, obviously, the signs of dementia, including just absolute freezes where his ability to express himself is expressive aphasia. It just stops. And it stops in really, really inconvenient places. But of all the times that it could have happened, it happened approximately 13 minutes into the debate. Most people are not going to sit there like I did and you did probably and watch the entirety of the debate. They're not going to do that. They've maybe got 10, 15 minutes into him. Of all of the times that he could have screwed up and really showed the ineptitude that characterizes not only his night last night, but the entirety of his term, he did it at the very beginning when most people were watching. And of course, that's going to send panic throughout the electorate, of course, the Democrat electorate for sure. Because if you're not a Democrat and you're not sold your soul to the party, then you've been watching this for a while knowing that the ship is going to crash. Anyone watching this last night, I think who had number one, empathy, and two, humility, would see his gaffes, President Biden's gaffes, as a very unfortunate and sad turn of events. Now, when I was watching it last night and watching him freeze and fumble around, on one hand, there's the part of you that says this guy needs to be completely beaten summarily to a point where no Democrat would dare show their face as being aligned with him. But the opposite side of it was this man and his family have led wicked and evil lives. Not so popular to say nowadays in a time of postmodernism where there seems to be no objective right or wrong, evil or good, beneficent or malfeasance. But that man has led a wicked life, and watching him make a fool of himself and lose his honor and dignity in front of 300 million people in the United States, plus Lord knows how many illegals, and the rest of the world was a very sad moment. And it's a moment that we should sit and take pause back and be like, dear God, please don't let me descend to such a point in my life. It is a fearful thing to watch judgment of God unfold on an individual and on a nation corporately. And that's what I thought last night, which leads me really into the next point. We are under judgment as a nation. Again, going back to the point that I mentioned earlier, we don't have a national legacy that's multi-centuries old. We don't have deep roots in history as a nation. And I don't think that the majority of Americans have really wrapped their head around the reality that presents in such a tempestuous time as what we're living. Other nations historically have had the deep roots of civilization from which to draw. The British, of course, had the Magna Carta going back to the Middle Ages. When we look at our legacy here in the United States, we have the Revolution, which you could argue as an outcropping of the Enlightenment and of English law, etc., was the culmination of mankind's best traits. But the challenge with the United States is because we don't have the deep roots of history, we have the shallow but efficient roots of our original principles and ratifying precepts. But whenever a wind blows harshly, as in the case of a storm, the tree, in order to stay upright, has to draw upon the strength of its deep roots. We have roots that are shallow but go far, if properly maintained. And that's the roots of principle and of God-fearing piety. But this nation, in the midst of the storm in which we currently find ourselves, has neglected to water those roots. And in a time like we find ourselves currently, it is obvious to me that having a leader so incapable and so feckless and such an embarrassment as what we witnessed last night is divine judgment for the fact that we have neglected the ancient path, that we have failed to honor the principles that once made us great. And not only was this a warning to us, I think, in the United States, but it was a sobering reality that the rest of the world could witness. Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap. As a nation, we have sown the bitter seed of godlessness, postmodernism, of redactionism, of historical illiteracy, and now we are reaping and eating the bitter fruit of it. A loss of respect internationally at a time and a juncture in history where the world is vacillating to such a degree that we really are standing on the precipice of World War III. And people throw this concept around, this idea of World War III, but I really doubt that most people have grappled with this stark and scary reality of what that manifests as. Untold suffering for people. And the question is, what do we do about this now? We have a leader who is not fit to care for himself, let alone represent the nation. The Democrats certainly have no better option right now. The question is, what are they going to do? What are we going to do, though? We, each of us, have an opportunity right now. Instead of digesting the popcorn that we ate, from last night, and crowing merrily over our enemies, domestic enemies, failures and fault. I think the opportunity that we have right now is to look within. Because on one hand, there is a level of gratification seeing such an evil man make a fool of himself and his party make a fool of themselves. But on the other side, the honor of our nation was dragged through the mud last night. Evil, truly evil regimes like North Korea and others have zero incentive right now to police themselves and to redress their own problems from within, human rights abuses. I won't even go into the evil things that regimes like North Korea do to believers, Bible believers they have in prison, and the way that women are treated. It's too awful to tell. A weak good creates a strong evil. What we saw last night was the United States looked weaker on the national stage than any time that I can ever remember. Certainly weaker than any time in our nation's history. That was a low point for our nation's history. And oftentimes I ask myself, what would Sir Winston say? Sir Winston Churchill. Sir Winston Churchill, of course, for those of you who know, I love to read. I love to read his writings, and not just the speeches, but he was a consummate historian. And because of that, he really became one of the greatest statesmen of modern memory. I asked myself, what would he say at this point? This was an example of the decline of nations, what we witnessed last night. And the question is, do we have a revival in us? Do we have a reinventing in us? Do we have a resurgence of these old principles and the ancient path in us? I don't know. What do you think? Leave me a comment below. Do you think that this was a wake-up call for people last night? Do you think that the United States is at a point now of divergence where people are seeing just how far we've come and they're turning back? Or do you think that people are going to double down and continue in their wickedness? As gratifying as it was last night to see a wicked and evil man get his comeuppance, there is a point of sobering reality that I think we all have to process, and that is we got to this place. We have sunk to this level because of the cumulative impacts of the choices of hundreds of millions of people. We get the government that we permit, and we have permitted this. Now what are we going to do to fix it? That's what I took away from the debate last night. It made me more inwardly focused and more pensive on what I can do in my own sphere to right the course of my community. What did you take away from it? Leave me a comment below. Friends, I hope the video was helpful for you today. If you enjoyed this video, please share this with one person. Also, if you haven't subscribed and clicked the bell button to make sure that you continue getting the videos I put out, make sure to do that because you're not likely to see the videos in your feed unless you do so. The algorithm is not friendly to conservative types. Also, friends, we are going into a lot of uncertainty right now. One need only peruse the brief catalog of human history, misery, and suffering to see just how close we are to such a juncture. Being prepared right now is imperative. Beans, bullets, and band-aids, we talk about that on this channel. But friends, medical preparedness is very important because the first thing to go, whether it's government expenditures or whether it's support for a grid, the first thing to go is healthcare. And I teach courses online and in person. My in-person class in Knoxville, Tennessee, I have a boot camp that's coming up where you can train with me and you can learn these skills. For the first week, we teach Medical Prep 101, 201, and 301. And for the second week, we teach herbal theory and preparation, how you can take all these principles of preparedness and of self-sufficiency from a healthcare standpoint, care for your own family's needs, and also make your own herbal preparations to support your family in rough times. Friends, being prepared right now is so essential because in cases like this, we really do not know what's about to happen. Even the wisest people that I've spoken to said this thing is up in the air. And when I say this thing, I'm talking about the trajectory of our nation right now. This is very sobering. And we need to be prepared not only to defend ourselves, not only to meet our family's food needs and take care of the basics of feeding ourselves, but also to care for your family's medical needs. You can train with me online. Also, I have 2 courses, the Foundations of Medical Prep and also the Herbal Preparedness course. You can dip your toe in with the 4-hour course. And then also I have the expanded course, which is approximately 7 hours for the herbal class. We should be rededicating ourselves to diligence right now and to preparedness and really looking inwards and seeing what can we do to improve our community? What can we do to make the world better around us? And not in some fatalistic, Pollyannish worldview, but what can I do to better equip my community for when this thing comes down? Because apart from an act of God and massive repentance and revival in this country, I see this thing continuing headlong into a crash. Our dollar and the solvency of our currency is laughable. The fiat currency is about to come down. We have a puppet in the leadership of the executive branch, and we have a more divided and crazed nation right now than I could ever have imagined, certainly that I've ever seen in my lifetime. Friends, if this video blessed you, and if it caused you to think, please share this with one person who you know also would do well to think and reflect and be prepared for the times coming. We should all be looking inward. We should all be praying for our country. I hope the video was helpful for y'all. Have a very blessed weekend. For now, it's Patriot Nurse signing off, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.